Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us for chapter 2 of the book of Proverbs. If you missed last week's, it's online now. Also, for Patreon people, I'm uploading the MP3 so you can download that straight to your phone without having to go through YouTube. It's a little bonus for people who support behind the scenes. And if you've got any questions, please let us know. Thank you to everyone that commented on YouTube last week. For the commenters that remain, I appreciate your input. And for the ones I deleted, thanks for listening. It was good. All right, so we're being led through the book of Proverbs by Rabbi Neely, who's joined us again this week. Thank you so much for your time last week and for coming back.
Always good to be here. Thank you for providing this forum.
All right. Okay, Proverbs 2. My son, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments.
All right, pause right there.
Okay.
Because what we have to figure out who's the dad.
Right.
So, this is a little bit of a question mark, and commentators will roll this in different ways. So one is it could be the eponymous, Solomon from the first chapter that is speaking generally to whoever it is, speaking to generally whoever it is that is listening to this lesson as a son. And that term may be used as a more inclusive than an actual biological son. Much as people still use that, and they'll say, son, listen here. And the person they're talking to is not actually their son. The other option, of course, is that this is God speaking to all of us, speaking through that form. Now, the problem with that interpretation is, of course, that there's going to be a great deal of God in the third person in this conversation. So if you're talking from God, you would expect God would say me rather than he, for example. A third option, and one which will definitely appear more explicitly in later chapters, is the idea that this is Chokhmah speaking, that this is wisdom personified, speaking to the people. And in my opinion, that's probably the smoothest reading of this chapter, because in order to treasure my commandments and all of that, you need to have a certain level of status. And Solomon, speaking of his own commandments, doesn't quite fit, in my opinion, the tone of the chapter. And like I said, the grammar problems of making this be God directly speaking is also tricky. But having wisdom speaking on behalf of God, on behalf of the commandments, on behalf of Torah, and especially since wisdom is personified later on in the book, to me seems to be the best way to read this. So this is wisdom calling out in and of itself to the listener.
Now, there's a verse in my mind that starts, if you seek me, you will find me. Is that in the book of Proverbs? Because I know that's explicitly wisdom talking. There's something in the back of my mind that's, I remember reading that as a kind of noob to the Bible and thinking it was God saying, if you seek me, you will find me. And then later on, I read in the commentary that it was wisdom. So maybe that's something that's going to pop up later in this.
Yeah, I believe that is Book of Proverbs. I'm pretty sure that's considerably later in the book. Well, I mean, not in the first couple chapters. But,
sure. Okay. But yeah, the wisdom thing makes sense because I mean, you've got the two. It kind of breaks up the first verse, the first line, my son. But you can't have my son and treasure up my commandments in a very easy way. You're right. And the idea of wisdom being an anthropomorphic voice kind of makes sense there. Right, good.
And there is an underlying philosophy there that is found in that metaphor, which is to say that wisdom and Torah and God are different ways of, well, not the Torah and wisdom are both means of God expressing into the world. And that balance between, not balance, that trying to find the right words. English is hard this morning, it seems. The parallel presence of both wisdom and Torah are not mutually contradictory. And the idea that Torah, that wisdom in all of its many facets leads to God and leads to Torah, and that Torah in its way leads to wisdom, is really one of the overriding themes of the book of Proverbs. In many communities, wisdom was considered a separate genre of literature that had nothing to do necessarily with the religion. And certainly in the modern world, many people will treat wisdom or intelligence or other forms of knowledge as being wholly separate from any sort of religious experience. But the book of Proverbs sees them as being from the same source and very complementary.
So that's kind of like you've got two different channels of information that might run parallel, but they complement each other.
Well, I like to think of it, and there's lots of discussion, of course, so this is not the only opinion. But I like to think of it more as we have two different ways of tuning in to the same channel.
Right. Okay.
It's not that God is broadcasting in different wavelengths. It's we simply hear it in different ways. And wisdom is very much a reflected knowledge, as opposed to revelation, which is a more direct knowledge. But both of them help us understand the other more clearly than we could on its own. So one can't really attain the depth of wisdom without Torah and revelation, and one really cannot understand Torah and revelation without also experiencing and understanding that reflected wisdom from the world outside of just the revealed word.
Okay, good, right, okay. 2. If you make your ear attentive to wisdom and your mind open to discernment, if you call to understanding and cry aloud to discernment, if you seek it as much as you do silver and search for it as for treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and attain knowledge for God. It's a very much it's saying that you can't just lay back and wait for it to happen, all right? You've got to put some effort in and actively look and search out. This isn't something that's just going to vicariously pop into your head.
Exactly right. Experience is just the act of living, but wisdom is the act of reflecting upon that experience and then growing from it. And of course, the beautiful part of this is as it sort of culminates there in verse 5, and it's going to be sort of more explained in verse 6 and 7 and so on, is that, like I said, wisdom leads to this knowledge of God and this reverence, this awe of God. And a lot of people take pride in their simple faith. The book of Proverbs does not idolize simple faith. If simple faith is all you can manage, great, wonderful, not going to take that away from you. But the ultimate goal is not simple faith, but it is deep understanding and wisdom that creates the best, strongest, and most powerful experience of God.
My sink is gurgling. Hopefully that's in a second. There we go.
See what I said about life?
For the Lord grants wisdom, knowledge, and discernment by his decree. That kind of infers, this grants wisdom. I mean, are we to take it that some people just aren't open, or is there is this something that's freely available to everyone? Or because it says that after it, he says he reserves ability for the upright and is a shield for those who live blamelessly, and it does kind of infer that wisdom is maybe something that's handed down as a gift.
So I'm just trying to see if there's a different translation that might. Yeah, so if we look at like one of the older translations, which is often a little bit more literal before the translator has made his own comment. So the phrase that's used in here is not that by his decree, but literally it's out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. So there are many different ways to understand that. Obviously, the translation of God decrees it because it's from his mouth is a perfectly fine interpretation. But personally, I would argue that this is trying to say that God has shared knowledge and wisdom. Right. God has given it. And of course, we would call that Torah and the rest of the biblical texts. That this is one of the ways that God has passed on wisdom to the people. And that, is, I think, a clearer way of understanding this relationship. It isn't that God flips a magic light switch inside someone's head, and only the people that God chooses. It's instead God has laid this treasure, and with effort, it is attainable. God has made this available. It's the same way that God has put the gold in the mountain, and if you're willing to dig for it, you'll find it. God has put wisdom in the world, and if you're willing to dig, you'll find it.
That's actually very interesting. I mean, obviously it says there that you search for it like you would search for riches, but you putting it out there that the gold and the silver are there, and it depends on whether you want to get off the couch and go and look for it. It makes it much more kind of visceral to when you're looking at the text. It really is. Sometimes the difference between knowing and not knowing is going to look.
Very much. When you say I can't find my wallet, and you haven't actually gotten up to look for it, it's not the wallet's fault.
He reserves the ability for the upright and is a shield for those who live blamelessly, guarding the paths of justice, protecting the way of those loyal to him. It's interesting now, after kind of looking at this stuff for a few years, seeing the word upright and the word way. They're kind of big themes when you start looking at Torah for the first time. You hear words like it's the way, the truth, and the light, and the people that keep Torah are upright. Those words don't really come up so much in the text of the 5 books of Torah, but they do when people are talking about Torah.
Well, exactly, because it's the fulfillment of the Torah that marks one as being upright. But this is the rest of the chapter is really going to pick up on this theme, which is counter to what many people seem to feel about wisdom. Many people seem to feel that wisdom is neutral, that it is neither good nor bad, that you can be an evil person but wise, and you can be a good person or wise. And really the rest of chapter 2 here, from this point on, is going to say, no, you do not get true wisdom if you're a bad person. You can certainly become more intelligent, and you can certainly learn from experience, and you can manage your life more effectively according to your unfortunately twisted goals. But that's not true wisdom. That is not the ultimate goal that God has laid out for us, and that is not the true treasure. The only way to get to it is by living in a certain manner, and living in a certain manner while reflecting upon it through this wisdom tradition. That is what truly opens up the chambers of the mind.
This is why I love recording. I would never have, I've never heard that before, and I'm sitting here listening to you thinking, well, surely you can be super smart and a completely nasty guy. And then my mind just wanders off a little bit, and I think about Buddhists. They sit there all day thinking about wisdom and about achieving higher planes, but they're not going out and slaughtering people to get there. They have a holistic and harmless life. So maybe there is something inherently peaceful and non-combative about trying to achieve intelligence and a smart way of looking at life. But
I think you're absolutely right. If you look throughout world and human history, you don't see anybody who would be universally recognized as wise as living a vicious or mean or petty life. And conversely, you don't see anyone who refuses to abandon their evil, immoral, or otherwise twisted ways, ever reaching a state that any other person would describe as being wise. We intuitively know this. It's just we also intuitively reject it because that sounds like hard work.
Right.
If I can learn to be a doctor without having to be good or bad, and unfortunately there are both good and bad people who are doctors, then why can't I just learn to be wise the same way? And the book of Proverbs is saying, no, that doesn't work like that, because true wisdom is ultimately connecting you to God, which is what we established just a few verses ago. And God isn't bad. And therefore, if you design your life in a way that is counter to what God wants from this world, you're never going to reach that ultimate point.
Okay. You will then understand what is right, just, and equitable. Every good course, for wisdom will enter your mind, and knowledge will delight you. Foresight will protect you, and discernment will guard you. This is very much like armor there, protection and guarding.
Wisdom is the best armor.
It will save you from the way of evil men, from men who speak duplicitously, who leave the paths of rectitude. Okay, that looked worse than it was. To follow the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and exult in the duplicity of evil men.
I should point out that the word that's being translated as rectitude there is a cognate of the word for upright. So you could easily also translate that, who leave the paths of the straight or the upright.
Okay. I don't know if I've ever read that word before. I recognized it, but it's I don't find that in a lot of the literature. I say literature, it's mostly Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, but those kind of books. Men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their course. It will save you from the forbidden woman. I'd like to hear more about her, and from the alien. Yeah.
Let's take care of the men first before we get to the men. I mean, before we get to the woman, let's take care of the men.
2019, we can look at the women as well.
We certainly can, but really, of the men first. But really, from verse 12 through 15, it's one unit, and then from 16 on, it's going to be a separate unit.
Yeah.
So who are these men, right? What is this duplicity? This is very much what we talked about in the first chapter of people who think I can do a shortcut. Right. And when we talk about a straight path versus a crooked path, English. When we talk about a straight path versus a crooked path, that's really what we're talking about, are people who want to take shortcuts in life. And shortcuts are the cheap imitation of wisdom. Right. Whenever someone has here's a handy little tip that'll save you time.
Right.
9 times out of 10, the shortcut that they're offering is a failure because it misses certain key points of whatever it was you were trying to accomplish in the first place. But it's faster and easier, and therefore it is much more seductive. In fact, there's there are whole YouTube channels of all those life hacks, which if you ever watch the debunking videos, most of them are not true at all. I mean, they are literally filmed with fakery, and they have never actually been tested. And they don't work when you try to put them into real practice. So this idea of, there's a short way, there's a quick way, there's an easy way. This is very much what is being discussed in this block of text. And those quick, easy shortcuts are the path to evil, because that is how you convince yourself that what you're doing, even though it's wrong, is right. It's like, yeah, but I ultimately get what I should, and it's what I want, and obviously that adds up to a very distorted life.
There's a kind of a physical parallel in on the internet today. You can go to places like Banggood or Wish and type in something like Apple AirPods. And you'll find dozens of people that will sell you Apple AirPods for $10, $20, $30, $40, $50.
Right.
When they should be $190. And you get them and they look like them and they feel like them, and you put them in and you can hear music. But they're not Apple AirPods. And you'll learn very quickly when you're trying to play anything at any volume that they're not Apple AirPods. It will save you from the forbidden woman, from the alien woman whose talk is smooth. Actually, we're just gonna we'll stay there. Forbidden woman. I mean, there could be so many reasons. I mean, it's the temple prostitutes that people talked about. People from other tribes. Maybe they're pregnant. Is there a way of unpacking that into something a bit more specific?
Yes. So first of all, the term forbidden, I'm not sure that I approve of that translation.
Okay.
I mean, well, the word that's used is zara, which is foreign, strange.
Okay.
It's the same word that's used, for example, when Nadav and Avihu bring a fire to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, on the inauguration.
Yeah.
Right, that is also a Eshizara. That's a strange fire, I think is often used as a translation. What it's basically talking about is somebody from outside the structure of either the covenant. That's really what the Nochriya, the alien woman, is talking about, or from the woman who is outside the realm of the commandments.
Okay.
Right? Because that's really what the Zara meant when it was talking about the fire when Nadav and Avihu came. It wasn't that it was like, we've never seen fire like that before, it's alien fire. It was much more of, that wasn't the fire that had been commanded. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be done. So what verse 16 and this metaphor of the woman seems to be saying over the next few verses is that unlike the crooked men who are very much about taking shortcuts, this is about taking the outer path to get to where you want to go, about going outside the normal route that you would take. So think outside the box is always used as a metaphor for creative thinking, but sometimes the box is there for a reason. And going outside the box means that you are really deviating from what is good and right. And that's the metaphor that's being used here. So as opposed to a shortcut through, this is the long way around and out, and therefore, in the mind of the author, not likely to ever come home again.
Right. And the last line there, whose talk is smooth, is that kind of implying seduction?
There's a very, seductive quality to that.
Right.
It sounds good, right? I mean, isn't that the pitch? Right? Anyone that comes in from outside the covenant, anyone who comes in and tries to preach from outside, the ways of Torah and Judaism, they always make it sound good. That's how it works. And you lure someone outside by having these well-polished phrases and the perfect examples that you've worked on for years, and the sales pitch is always attractive. And of course, the initial sales pitch is always pegged to something that you still legitimately believe in. That's why the groups to missionize Jews usually will try to pretend that a person can remain Jewish even while adopting whatever the missionary is selling, because they don't want to be obvious that what they are actually saying is reject your Judaism and reject everything that you have been given. But that is really what's on offer, and that's what's going to be clear over the next few verses.
Okay. From the alien woman whose talk is smooth, who forsakes the companion of her youth and disregards the covenant of her God. All right, so this I have to ask now then, if who is the companion of her youth? Moreover, and disregards the covenant of her God. Is this someone that was in covenant with God and is now not, or?
Well, yes, it is kind of confusing, but that does seem to be the idea here, that this is saying that there was a relationship with God, but that they're moving away from that. The one of the interpretations of this is that this is a woman who, for example, might have sidled up to a Jewish man and have pretended to, and that's the companion of her youth, right? She became familiar with him, and they were together, even though she was not really Jewish, but she sort of became Jewish-y, assimilated to some degree into Jewish culture, but then begins to take him away from the breed, take him away from God, and herself away from God. So there's that is a line of interpretation. The other line of interpretation of this, however, is that for any of those that will preach this other way of living that is counter to Judaism, and as I should point out that there are many ways to be good with God and not be Jewish, but this is speaking specifically to a Jewish audience in Proverbs here.
Right.
So this isn't saying that someone else can't be doing just fine with God and being a good, righteous person, but this is specifically talking about someone who is trying to lead a Jewish person away from Torah and away from Judaism. So just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, I'm glad you did, because it comes up a lot. And I certainly, personally myself, I know for a very long time I was very confused about how you can live as good a life as you can without being Jewish, because it does, sometimes it feels that you have to, I don't know, it's kind of like yeah, if you've got a car, you need to be a member maybe of the AA, or you're not really looking after your car properly, even though you might be a mechanic. It's still not really quite good enough unless you've got that complete coverage. So I'm glad you said that. Okay.
Good.
Her
So
house.
with
Yeah.
that, so with that in mind, right? Those that are not Jewish can also be not so good with God,
Right.
and that is also a problem for them.
Mm.
Right. So another interpretation of this verse is that we're talking about this, in quote, wisdom literature of other peoples that has rejected God. So someone sidles up and starts trying to preach the merits of the Canaanite pantheon.
Mm.
Well, obviously that's not our way, but it's also not God's way. Right? It's definitely not monotheism, and there's so many other problems with how ancient Canaanites used to do their worship. So those Canaanites, or anyone else who was involved in that pagan idolatrous life, they had also disregarded their covenant with God, meaning the covenant of Noah, right? The covenant of Adam, that going all the way back to the beginning, human beings are supposed to be connected to God and God alone. It doesn't have to be in the Jewish way, but it does have to be exclusive of other ways. So this foreign attraction is preaching here, is also guilty of rejecting that covenant with God.
Okay. This line's great. 18. Her house sinks down to death, and her course leads to the shades. The shades is a very ambiguous term, and it kind of sounds spooky. Death, maybe I'm going to take a wild guess. That's like Sheila or something.
No, it's death, Mavet.
Oh, wow. Okay. Her house sinks down to death, and her course leads to shades. Can you? Okay, so her house. Obviously, it's not talking about a physical house. It's talking about your. If you become a part of her, or if you adopt her view, I think is as opposed to just moving into a house.
Exactly. We're not talking about the subsidence of the foundation of her bungalow. we're talking about the those who follow in that path, that organization, those who are part of that way. Just like when we have in rabbinic literature, we talk about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the house of Hillel, the house of Shammai. We're not talking about, Hillel lived here. We're talking about the school of thought.
And what the shades word there, what does that actually represent?
Okay, so then we get into commentary. So the idea here of being, pulled down into darkness, you may not be surprised, is picked up by most of the commentators to talk about things like Gehinnom, right? That you are being taken towards punishment. You will suffer for this, and even if you don't suffer in this life, you will suffer in the world to come as your punishment is meted out.
Such a great line, and her course leads to the shades. It's brilliant. I'll take a screenshot for that, and I might draw it out later. Okay. All who go to her cannot return, and find again the paths of life. So, all right, that's a little bit confusing. I mean, surely there is a kind of get out of jail free card that comes with repentance.
So I'm going to just pull up some of the other translations, because I would not have translated that up myself, and I want to see if someone else has. Yes, that's better. Okay, so even just going back to the JPS 1917, because the word cannot is not there in the Hebrew. Right? The translation they give in 1917 is none that go unto her, neither do they attain unto the paths of life. Right? No, they go under her return, which is not they cannot return, they won't return.
I see.
Right? It's and I can see why they said, if they won't, then it must be that they are unable to. But cannot can imply both an internal or external barrier. Whereas the Hebrew does not imply an external barrier. It implies more of an internal, right? You cannot find your way out of here, right? You cannot see the right path, which is how the commentators say it, is that once you have been pulled into this, you can no longer see the right road to walk to get away from this. You no longer are looking in the right direction to know how to do tshuva, to how to return. And so that is unfortunately where you get stuck. You'll never make it back to Chaim. You'll never make it back to life, which is what is the ultimate goal.
That's much better translation than that one.
Yeah, it's hard, because I do really appreciate and I really sympathize with the people who did the translation for the JPS in the 80s, the Modern Jewish Publication Society translation, because they wanted to get rid of the these and thous, they wanted to get rid of the untos and all of that, and they wanted to make it sound like English now sounds, which is absolutely what a translation should do, right? Every translation needs to stay current with the changing language of English, because otherwise the translation isn't a good translation anymore. It might have been good in that generation, but if the English has shifted, it no longer is effective in conveying the original Hebrew. The problem being that sometimes the modern translators go to so much effort to capture what they think is the best modern idiom that they miss some of the nuances of the Hebrew that allow for deeper interpretation. And that really hampers somebody who is left only reading the English when trying to get a sense of the text.
Okay. So follow the way of the good and keep to the paths of the just, for the upright will inhabit the earth, and the blameless will remain in it. Oh, the upright will inhabit the earth. That's a little bit of beautification there. Yeah, okay.
It's not the meek, but
no, yeah, the upright. And the blameless will remain in it, while the wicked will vanish from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. I'm assuming we're going to find out how later on. Is there is this? I know where am I going? It's difficult. Like sometimes I'll get in conversations with people and they'll say, what about the last days? What about the end times? Is there going to be like a big war and Armageddon and all this stuff? And I'm like, well, it doesn't really say. So I mean, when we read in the text here that the blameless will remain in the earth and the upright will inhabit it, the wicked will vanish and the treacherous will be rooted out. I mean, what's the context for that? In their lifetime, in general?
Well, yes. So it depends on the commentator. Rashi translates this as this is all Lo'olam haba, right? This is all the world to come.
Right.
That this is the ultimate goal and the ultimate reward, or the ultimate failing, will be in the times of Mashiach and the time of our spiritual existence beyond this material realm. But you can also read this as simply saying that if people are good and just, this is what the world will look like. And there is a truth to this, that the incidence of violence, the incidence of treachery and evil has diminished as a proportion of human society over time. So it may not have happened immediately, and it may not have happened completely, but the wicked are being pushed out of this world. The world is generally better now than it was 100 years ago. And 100 years ago, it's better than it was 1,000 years ago, even if individuals may obviously buck the trend.
Right, that makes sense. Okay, and now that's the end. We're at number 3, which we shall do next time. Okay, this is brilliant. If you guys at home have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you enjoy it, please leave it in the comments. Share this with your friends. Thank you very much, Rabbi Neely, for giving us your time again.
Thank you, Jason.
And we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.